Okay, so let's look at the idea of searching through corpora this week. So one thing is that corpora are always large, as we've seen, and so you can't look through the corpora manually, and you use some computer software to help that. And concordance software is the most common way to carry out that kind of analysis. And so last week we saw that we could produce frequency lists from the corpus, and this week we'll look at searching for words and phrases, and we're using that same software. So if we do have some corpora, we can get some information quite easily, word list and word frequency. So what are the most common words in the corpus? That's very straightforward. We can also look for word combinations, collocations at high risk, low maintenance, deep passion, and so on. And we'll look at that a bit later in this presentation. A little bit more difficult, but we can also look for grammatical constructions. So, less lexical and more grammatical, and then again, we can talk about the frequency things like how common is the passive, how often does the passive occur with the biphrase, as in he was seen by the doctor, and so on. And then perhaps the third linkage is between any of these things, the words or the collocations or the constructions, and text and genres. So, how often is a passive used in spoken uses versus written usage, or in fiction versus newspapers. So we can have a corpora representing different genres, and we can do some comparative work to investigate these questions. So luckily, the basic procedure is very straightforward, very simple. We're going to search for some words and phrases. Typically we sort the results in a particular way, and then we obtain some kind of frequency information. So we'll keep doing this throughout the semester. Complications come in that we can have more complicated searches. So if the corpus has part of speech tags, and then we can use those part of speech tags in our searches, or we can use some certain wildcard characters in our searches. And there's a very powerful search syntax called regular expressions, which is essentially a Boolean syntax which allows for ands and ors and nots. And we'll look at that as a little bit, it's not very elegant to look at, but it's very powerful and can be very useful. But today we're just looking at very simple searching just to get going, and we'll have the practical session a little bit later, and you can have a go with this. Using, as I said, the same Monoconc Pro that we used last time. So on this next screen, here I just did a search for thing, and here's just a little sample. We have 1,500 matches of the word thing. Here it's telling you something about the sort, first right, second right. There's only one file, this corpus, and it's quite a large file. So we have this characteristic keyword in context, which has some advantages. So we have the search word lined up in the middle of the screen, and then so the top instance up here. So this is the first instance of thing, and then we had the preceding context and the following context, and then the concordance software goes through the corpus to find the next instance of thing, and it presents it in that second line. Okay, and that display just makes it quite easy, looking through quite a lot of examples, to pick out the patterns because they visually stand out. So here we have thing followed by over. And so just that combination, that repetition makes it stand out. Here's people and so on. And so you can look through quite quickly to see what the common patterns are, at least in that kind of close context to the search word. And it's not sorted on the left, but we still see some kind of repeated patterns because they're so common with whole thing and same thing, best thing, one thing, only thing, for one thing, and so on. The words in red here are just indicating high frequency. So even though we're looking at the concordance lines, the fact that whole is kind of this scarlety red means it's frequent, and the is a brighter red means it's even more frequent. There's supposed to be several shades of red. I can't see many shades of red, but it's just a kind of indication of the frequency. Look at this, we see some other kind of things we should just note. So here's kind of indication of the paragraph marks in the paragraph, starting the paragraph. And here's that thing we talked about last week where the apostrophe is being changed into this ampersand pound sign 146 semicolon. So it looks a bit messy when you first see it, but you soon learn to ignore that. So one thing we do then, we can search for a word or a phrase, and we see all the results, and we sort the results, as I said. The sort menu's up here. We see these patterns, and we can resort the results as we like. Now the sorting, I'm not shown it here, but there's a primary sort and a secondary sort, and as I said down here we have first right, second right. So you see here we have over, over, over. So the first right sort is the same result. Okay, so then for these lines with thing over, what do we do with those lines? How do we sort those 4 lines? And here we decided to sort them in terms of the word which is second right, which is the second word. So we have again before and before into. So we could have done it, first right, first left, or first left, first right, or whatever. We can just try different things and look at the patterns that we see with those different sorts. It doesn't take long to get used to doing that. So the first thing, as I say, you can look through, you can sort the results, and then scroll through and see the patterns and make a note of the different patterns that you see. Another way of getting at the data is to have the corpus, have the software kind of count up these words which are following and these words which are preceding, etc. And that also gives a very nice view, kind of an overview of the use of the search term. So if we look at that, here's the colloquial frequency. It's under the frequency menu, and we go to colloquial frequency. And so we see, thing is in the middle here, it's not showing, it's in the middle here. And here's first left, so it's the preceding word. So the most common word preceding thing in this corpus is one. And the next most common word is whole, and the most frequent word following is, and followed by here two, and this is 2 words over. So again, we can just get quite a good sense of the usage. We know that one is good, only is good, first, same, best, last, good, important, right, real, bad, great. So you could do a little bit of analysis there. You can kind of see what, there's some commonality among these words, and there's certain patterns which is showing up as being very frequent with the word thing. Okay, so something like one thing or the whole thing, important thing, are kind of collocations, they're word combinations. The important is attracted to thing, and best is attracted to thing. So those are called collocations. So let's look at that a little bit more. We'll come back to it a little bit later. So the collocates of a word are the frequent co-occurring words. So for example, if office is the node word or the search word, then post would be a colloquy. We have post office. Or head would be a colloquy. We have head office. Or take, the verb take, so you have take office, those kind of colloquies. And then we sort of say that head office is a collocation. So collocations are a big deal in corpus linguistics and increasingly in language teaching as well. So why are collocations a big deal? And there's several answers to this. One is that knowing a language involves knowing lots and lots of collocations, and that's why language learning is quite difficult. You go through, you learn some vocabulary items, you learn some grammar, present tense, past tense, passive, conditional, but there's still quite a long way to go, and that's because you have to learn all these collocations. Theoretically, collocations are interesting or important because it's kind of unclear how to deal with collocations in the grammar, and we'll come back to that. And another reason why collocations are interesting is they provide clues to meaning. And we didn't look at this, but if you look at the words preceding husband, and say the adjectives preceding husband and the adjectives preceding wives, those adjectives will give a clue as to how people view husbands and wives and the kind of ways they refer to them. So let's look at a little bit of colloquy data, and here we'll just look at the colloquies of hi. So here I taken the results out of the software and put them into a word table, and so. But the results are just as you kind of find them in the software. So here the top colloquy is high school, almost like a single word, and in this corpus that accounts for a fifth, 21% of the instances of high, and there's 106 examples. And then we have here high standards, 6% of all the instances of high, or 7% of all the instances of high, high level, high stakes, high priority, high end, high on, high and something, high levels, high degree, high expectations, high quality, high importance, high probability. So you see high and here, so it showed up as being very frequent, even though it's not a collocation. There's something missing here. So the software is just throwing out the data, just counting frequency, counting the co-occurring words, and it's going to be up to you as the interpreter or analyst to pick out which data is interesting. The software can present you with use the data, but you have to come along and sort of say, yeah, that looks interesting, and I know why that's not interesting, and so on. Okay, so that's a quick overview of the use of the concordances. Let's move on and take something from Hunston, some issues in interpreting concordance lines. So you're kind of novices. It's going to take you a while to work out how to do this. Okay, the first nature of the search term. Well, what are we looking for? Are we looking for a word? Are we looking for a lemma? We talked about lemmas last time. Are we looking for a phrase? We have different options when we do the searches. And then, some concordance lines you can just delete. You can ignore them, or you can actually delete them if you don't want them. And then, as I said, you can sort the data in different ways. It's easy to sort. We can get different views, so just have a go sorting, and then different sorts bring out different patterns in the data. And most of the action is in the words surrounding the search term. So look there first. If it's a verb, we typically look at the words following. If it's an adjective, we look at the words following. If it's a noun, you might look at the words preceding to see the action. In some cases, you need a larger cotext, several words away, or maybe even further away if it's doing something a bit more discoursey. So we end up with a lot of data. We typically we get a lot of lines. So one technique that the people in Birmingham, like Susan Hunston and John Sinclair, used to use is to look closely at a few concordance lines. So you kind of take a sample of your concordance lines, and you try to draw some generalizations from those concordance lines. Try to see some patterns, try to make some hypotheses. And then you can look at another set of concordance lines and more data to see if your generalization holds. Okay, so that's kind of one way of dealing with the data, kind of breaking it down into smaller chunks, and then adding data as you go. So when we look at the concordance lines, we can see what is typical, what is frequent, maybe what is central, what Hunston refers to as central, kind of semantically prototypical. We'll perhaps come back to that in another time. And again, in interpreting concordance lines, the frequent collocates are very important. What the larger formal patterns, and to say the collocates also give us a clue as to the meaning of the search term. And then later on, we'll look at part of speech categories, see if patterns emerge if we look at part of speech data rather than just the words. When you're looking at those collocates, you're looking at the words, the patterns, like we saw for thing, then you might, in your mind, need to work out, is there some kind of semantic category here? We have a list of words, but can you group those words into semantic categories? Are the kind of color terms being used? Are the words hedges? Are the words superlatives? Are the words indicating a positive attitude or a negative attitude? You have to do some kind of semantic grouping. Again, the software just presents you with a list, and your skill comes in interpreting that list and finding the patterns. And so you have to use your own knowledge of the language to do that. Okay, so we have this kind of corpus-based data, and we can use that to kind of study the language in order to approach the grammar. And I'll talk a little bit about this. So there tends to be a kind of corpus view of language. People who work with the corpora tend to come to similar views about the nature of a language. So it's led to more attention being paid to words, kind of lexis and phraseology. So, a lot of the language teaching syllabus is organized according to kind of grammar patterns, the present tense, the past tense, the passive, and so on. But with the use of corpora, people have focused more kind of at the lexical level, the kind of phrasal level, because a lot of the load of language, especially language learning, is kind of carried with this kind of what's called lexicogrammatical level. And this has led to some lexical approaches to language teaching. Willis has the lexical syllabus, and Lewis has the lexical approach, and we'll perhaps look at that, look at those a little bit later in the course. So linguists and language teachers have gone a long way in the past in dividing language into the vocab, the lexicon, the words, and the grammar, set of rules. And there's kind of some advantages to do that. It's kind of neat. You have the kind of very neat grammar rules the highly generalized view of grammar, and then you have the kind of idiosyncratic stuff in the words, but that neat division doesn't really hold, as we'll see when we look at the corpus. So let's take a phrase like the thing to do, or the thing to verb. So it's kind of, well, where does that fit? Is it in the lexicon? It's a bit big to be in the lexicon, since it's 4 words, or 3 words and a verb. So it's quite a common English expression, but it's hardly would say it was a kind of a word or collocation or a phrase. So it doesn't really fit in that notion of vocab. But then is it grammar? Well, it's very lexical to be grammar. You might say, instead of the thing to do, the thing to V for verb. But even so, we have all that, crucially we have thing there. We can't say the plan to do, or we can't put in some other noun instead of thing. And so, thing is important there. And it's kind of anchoring this construction. And so we have to kind of revise our view of grammar, in a sense, and we have to have this kind of wordy grammar, this lexical grammar. And so when we look at corpus data, we've kind of come up with this evidence of extensive multi-word units, like sort of thing, the thing to do. And these have various names like collocations, fixed expressions, chunks, prefabricated units, prefabs, lexical bundles. And so if we look at thing, we have those examples. If we look for the word change, we have things like change of attitude, change in attitude, change of heart, change in policy, change over time. So you have to know subject to change is a good one. So you have to kind of learn this stuff as a language learner, and so we need this. Part of knowing the language means knowing these collocations, these phrases. So let me skip the note. So I think a corpus view of grammar is kind of a network of these grammatical, lexical grammatical relations. We have the kind of collocations. We look at verb-object co-selection, so you tend to lose a job, find employment, be made redundant, and so on. And then we have constructions. We do have constructions such as the passive, but again, we'd want to know which verbs commonly occur in the passive, and maybe look at some lower level passive phrases. It's quite difficult to represent this kind of view of grammar. We use some kind of schemas where we use brackets, like post office to represent that collocation, or NN for noun and compound, or the thing to do, or the thing to say, or so on, where you have a kind of V slot. And then this other construction here, subject verb manner, is the way construction. It's a kind of good English construction, and so here, crucially in this construction, you have to have way. And so it's things like he pushed his way out of the room. So out of the room is the path, the possessive is his, and the manner is pushed. Or he bluffed his way through college. Okay, he bluffed his way through college. Again, we have a manner verb, and then the way, and then the path construction. So that's kind of one way of looking at it. We're not going to worry about this too much, but we perhaps need some way to kind of informally represent the kind of patterns that we come up with. And so these are kind of schemas related to schema theory in reading, and they have a form and a meaning, and they're kind of linked to some kind of network. So some of these are just lexical chunks like change of heart, which has a particular meaning, not to do with transplants, or we have more abstract meaning related to like noun of noun, which kind of is a more abstract representation of things like change of heart and other similar lexical meanings. Okay, so that's a quick run through. So I'll stop there with this part.